She was 14 years old when they decided she'd be the next American tennis icon, 15 when she broke records at Wimbledon, and by 18 she was arrested, in rehab, and completely gone from the sport. There's a specific kind of destruction that happens when you're built to carry a dream that isn't yours yet, when the world decides what you'll become before you've figured out who you are. Jennifer Capriati didn't fail because she lacked talent. She broke because talent was never the problem. Her name was Jennifer Capriati, and before she turned 16, the tennis world had already decided 3 things about her. She was American, she was gifted, and she was going to save women's tennis. That's a lot to put on someone who just finished 8th grade. But in the early 1990s, American tennis needed a star. And Capriati wasn't just talented, she was a phenomenon. At 14, she turned professional. By 15, she'd become the youngest player ever seeded at Wimbledon, breaking a record that had stood for years. The world saw a prodigy. What they didn't see was the wait. Because here's the thing about being called the future. When you're still a kid, it doesn't leave room for being anything else. Not messy, not uncertain, not human. And that pressure, it doesn't announce itself. It just builds, quietly, until it doesn't. This is the story of what happens when you're handed greatness too early, and what it costs to take it back on your own terms. The foundation of the problem was laid early. Capriati's talent wasn't discovered, it was engineered. At 12 years old, she won the prestigious Junior Orange Bowl. By 13, she was training with professionals. And by 14, her father and coaches had already mapped out her entire future. She wasn't just good, she was ready. Or at least, that's what everyone kept saying. But being ready as a player and being ready as a person are 2 completely different things. And no one seemed interested in that distinction. When she turned professional, straight out of middle school, the machine kicked into gear. Endorsement deals, magazine covers, prime-time interviews. She was everywhere. And the script was always the same. Smile, be gracious, talk about your dreams, remind everyone how normal you are. She'd say things like, "Oh, for me, it's easy to act normally. I just go home, I go to school, I hang out with my friends." But she was living in hotels, doing 20-hour days between tournaments and photo shoots. The normal was a script, not a reality. Because while she was reading Danielle Steele novels and eating licorice like any other teenager, she was also carrying the expectations of an entire sport. American tennis hadn't produced a true star in years. And now, at 14, she was supposed to be the one. There's a point where continuing takes more courage than quitting. But at that age, she didn't even know quitting was an option. Her first major crack came early, not in a loss, but in the realization that winning didn't make the pressure go away. It made it worse. Every victory raised the stakes. Every magazine cover added another layer of expectation. And the question everyone kept asking wasn't, "Are you okay?" It was, "What's next?" She almost walked away then. Not publicly, not dramatically, just internally. The part of her that wanted to be a kid started disappearing. And the part that knew how to perform started taking over. And what happens when the only version of yourself that gets rewarded is the one that isn't really you? The wins kept coming, and so did the cost. In 1990 and 1991, Capriati wasn't just competing, she was dominating. She reached the semi-finals of major tournaments. She beat top 10 players. She collected titles like they were inevitable. The tennis world watched and nodded. The prophecy was coming true. But prophecies don't account for biology or psychology or the fact that a 15-year-old's brain isn't wired to process this kind of pressure. Behind the scenes, the cracks were widening. Her schedule was relentless. Tournament after tournament, interview after interview, photo shoot after photo shoot. She was living in hotels, eating in restaurants, and spending more time with agents and coaches than with friends her own age. The word normal stopped making sense. And then came 1992, the year everything was supposed to peak. She reached the finals of the Barcelona Olympics, losing the gold medal match to Steffi Graf. To most, it was a triumph, an Olympic medal at 16, but to Capriati, it felt different. Not like an achievement, like another box checked, another expectation met. The truth is, winning doesn't fix what's broken underneath. It just delays the reckoning. By 1993, the reckoning arrived. That year, Capriati's performance started to slip. Not dramatically at first, just enough for people to notice. She lost in early rounds. She pulled out of tournaments. The rankings started to slide, and the same media that had built her up began asking uncomfortable questions. What's wrong with Jennifer? But the real question was simpler and darker. What happens when the person you were told to be starts suffocating the person you actually are? Between the US Open of 1993 and the French Open of 1998, Capriati didn't win a single match at a Grand Slam. Not one. 5 years of silence at the tournaments that had once defined her. And then came the headlines that changed everything. 1993. Arrested for shoplifting at a Florida mall. The item, a $15 ring from a kiosk. 1994. Arrested for marijuana possession. 1 joint. Entered rehab. For a 17-year-old who'd been under global scrutiny since middle school, these weren't crimes. They were escape attempts. The kind you make when you don't know how else to breathe. The media called it a spiral. Her critics called it inevitable, and the tennis world, the same one that had celebrated her at 14, started writing her off. Journalist Bud Collins would later describe it perfectly, a story of riches to rags. But here's what gets lost in that narrative, the part that no one wanted to talk about. This wasn't a kid making bad choices. This was a kid who had been told, for her entire adolescence, that her worth was tied to her performance, and when the performance cracked, so did everything else. Pressure doesn't break you. It reveals what you've been carrying all along, and what Capriati had been carrying alone, quietly, invisibly, was the weight of being someone else's dream before she ever had the chance to build her own. 3 years passed in silence. Small tournaments in Europe, empty stands, no cameras, no expectations. For the first time since she was 14, no one was watching. And maybe that silence was exactly what she needed to find her own voice again. Redemption doesn't happen overnight, and it's rarely clean. Capriati's return to tennis officially began in February 1996. But calling it a return makes it sound simpler than it was. She wasn't returning to the sport, she was rebuilding herself inside of it, and that process took years. The results were modest at first. Early exits, low-tier tournaments, rankings that barely moved. For 3 years, she played in relative obscurity. The cameras weren't watching anymore. The endorsements had dried up. The pressure was gone. And maybe that was exactly what she needed. In 1999, something shifted. In Strasbourg, France, she won her first title in 6 years. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't a grand slam, but it was hers. And when she spoke to the press afterward, something in her voice had changed. I feel like just a new person completely. Not a comeback, not a return, a new person. Because that's what this was really about. Not reclaiming the identity that had been built for her at 14, but building one for herself at 23. And then came 2001, the year she made the impossible happen. In January, she walked into the Australian Open ranked number 12 in the world. Not a favourite, not a threat, just another player trying to make noise. But over 2 weeks, she dismantled everyone in her path. In the quarterfinals, she beat Monica Seles, the 4th-ranked player in the world and a legend of the sport. In the semi-finals, she took down Lindsay Davenport, ranked number 2 and one of the most consistent players on tour. And in the final, she faced Martina Hingis, the number 1 player in the world, the reigning champion, the favourite. Capriati won in 3 sets. It wasn't just a victory, it was a statement. 11 years after turning professional, she'd finally won a Grand Slam, on her terms, in her time. The difference, the pressure was gone. No one expected her to save American tennis anymore. At 25, she was finally playing for herself, not for a prophecy built when she was 14. But she wasn't done. 5 months later, at the French Open, she did it again. This time against Kim Clijsters in the final, another Grand Slam. Another proof that 2001 wasn't a fluke. She reached the semi-finals at Wimbledon, the semi-finals at the US Open. By the end of the year, she had the best Grand Slam record of anyone on tour. And in October, she achieved what had once seemed impossible. She became the number 1 player in the world, not at 15 when everyone expected it, but at 25 when she'd earned it. The story had been rewritten, not from riches to rags, but as Bud Collins put it, riches to rags to richer. The question that haunted her entire career had finally been answered. Not by winning, but by surviving long enough to win on her own terms. So what's left when winning doesn't fix the original wound? Capriati's career ended the way so many do, not by choice, but by the body's refusal to continue. Chronic injuries forced her off the tour, and by her late 20s, she was gone again. This time, not in scandal, just in silence. She later described it like mourning. It was tough having to leave the game. It's like mourning a loved one that's gone, a relationship that's gone, a part of yourself. The struggles continued after tennis. In 2010, reports surfaced of a hospitalization following what was described as a mental health crisis. The same demons that had surfaced at 18 hadn't disappeared. They'd just been waiting. But in 2012, something else happened. Jennifer Capriati was inducted into the International Tennis Hall of Fame, not as the prodigy who burned out, not as the cautionary tale, but as a champion, a survivor, someone who had clawed her way back from the edge and redefined what her career meant. In her acceptance speech, she said something that captured everything. Grand Slams and being in the Hall of Fame, this is an achievement that I thought I would never reach. Not because she lacked talent, but because the journey to get there had nearly destroyed her. Her legacy isn't just about the 3 Grand Slams or the number 1 ranking. It's about what happened after the world gave up on her. It's about rebuilding when everyone assumes you're done, and it's about the cost of being built for greatness before you're ready to understand what that even means. From number 1 at 14 to gone at 18, back to number 1 at 25. The talent didn't change. She did. Talent isn't the problem. It never was. It's what we do with it, and who decides what it's for. If this story hit something deeper, if you've ever felt the weight of expectations that weren't yours to carry, there's something in the pinned comment you should see. And here's the real question. What do we lose when we turn prodigies into products before they've had the chance to just be people? Leave your answer below.